The spotlight hit Aretha Franklin's face at exactly the moment she saw her, and for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. The Queen of Soul forgot every word to the song she'd been singing for a decade. Coretta Scott King stood in the back entrance of Madison Square Garden, half hidden by security, her black dress catching the ambient light like a wound that wouldn't close. Aretha's hand went to her chest. The microphone dropped 6 inches, and 15,000 people held their breath without knowing why. By the way, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? What nobody in that arena understood yet was that this wasn't just a surprise visit from a grieving widow. This was the collision of 2 debts Aretha Franklin had been carrying since April 4th, 1968. Debts that pulled her in opposite directions. Debts that had been quietly destroying her for 4 years. On one side stood a promise she'd made to Dr. King 3 weeks before his assassination. On the other side stood a promise she'd made to herself the day they buried him. And now, with Coretta Scott King walking slowly down the side aisle toward the stage, Aretha had about 90 seconds to decide which promise would break her and which promise would save her. The band kept playing behind her, but they could feel something shifting. Her piano player, Kenneth Williams, glanced back at the horn section with eyes that said, "Stay ready for anything." Because when Aretha Franklin stopped mid-song at Madison Square Garden, you didn't ask questions. You just held on. This is the story of what happened in the next 47 minutes. The story they couldn't report in the newspapers the next morning because nobody could quite explain it. The story that changed how America understood the relationship between soul music and sacrifice. The story of the night Aretha Franklin had to choose between being an entertainer and being a witness. And it starts 6 months earlier, in a Detroit hotel room, with a phone call that Aretha almost didn't answer. June 1972, the Pontchartrain Hotel, room 804. Aretha Franklin was smoking her 3rd cigarette of the morning when the phone rang at 6:47 a.m. She knew it was too early for her manager, too early for her sister Carolyn, too early for anyone who understood that Aretha Franklin did not do mornings unless there was a recording session or a flight to catch. She let it ring 4 times before picking up. "This is Coretta King." Aretha sat up so fast she knocked over the ashtray on the nightstand. Ash scattered across the white sheets like gray snow. "Mrs. King, of course. How are you?" There was a pause on the other end. Not an awkward pause, a deliberate one. The kind of pause that carries weight. "I'm calling because I need something from you, Aretha. Something Martin would have wanted." Aretha's throat tightened. 4 years had passed since they'd lowered Dr. King into the ground at Southview Cemetery in Atlanta. 4 years since. Aretha had sung "Precious Lord, Take My Hand" at his funeral, her voice breaking on every 3rd word while the whole world watched. 4 years since she'd made 2 promises that were now about to collide. "Anything," Aretha said. "You know that. I'm organizing a benefit concert. December, at Madison Square Garden. The proceeds go to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Martin's work, his legacy." Coretta's voice was steady, but Aretha could hear something underneath it. Something that sounded like barely controlled desperation. "I need you to be part of it. I need your voice." Aretha looked at the calendar on the wall. December was 6 months away. She already had 3 album sessions scheduled, a television special, a tour through Europe that her label had been pushing for 2 years. "I'll be there," Aretha said before she could think about it. "Thank you." Another pause. "Aretha, I also need you to understand something. This concert isn't just about raising money. It's about showing the world that the movement didn't die with Martin, that we're still here, still fighting." "I understand." "Do you?" Coretta's voice sharpened just slightly. Not aggressive, just honest. "Because I need to know you'll be there. Not as Aretha Franklin the star, as Aretha Franklin the daughter of C.L. Franklin, as Aretha Franklin who sang at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church when she was 12 years old, as the woman who understands what this costs." Aretha closed her eyes. She thought about her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, who'd marched with Dr. King and hosted him at their home in Detroit. She thought about the nights when Martin had sat at their dinner table, talking about dreams and justice, while Aretha and her sisters served sweet tea and listened from the doorway. "I'll be there," Aretha said again. "You have my word." When she hung up, she sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes, not moving, because what she hadn't told Coretta was that she'd already made another promise, a promise to herself, a promise that after Dr. King's funeral, she would never again put movement work before her music, never again let the weight of history crush the thing that actually kept her alive. She'd watched what the movement had done to her father, watched it drain him, watched it nearly kill him when he'd been shot in 1979 during a home invasion that everyone suspected wasn't random. She'd watched singers and musicians burn themselves out, giving everything to the cause until there was nothing left, and she'd promised herself never again. But now Coretta King had called, and Aretha Franklin didn't break promises to Coretta King. She stubbed out her cigarette and picked up the phone to call her her manager. This was going to be complicated. The months between June and December passed in a blur of studio sessions and mounting anxiety. Aretha recorded Daydreaming and Rock Steady. She appeared on Soul Train and The Tonight Show. She performed in Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. And through it all, she carried the December date like a stone in her chest. Her sisters noticed. Carolyn pulled her aside after a recording session in September. "What's wrong with you?" Carolyn asked. "You've been somewhere else for weeks." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You stopped in the middle of Angel yesterday. You never stop. What's happening?" Aretha looked at her sister. Carolyn knew her better than anyone. Knew when she was hiding something. "I promised Coretta I'd do the benefit concert in December." "Okay, so I also promised myself I wouldn't do this anymore. Wouldn't put myself through this." Carolyn frowned. "Through what? It's one concert." "It's never one concert." Aretha's voice rose slightly. "It's never just singing. It's carrying all of it. All the grief, all the expectations, all the people looking at you like you owe them something because of who your father is and who you are and what you represent. And I'm tired, Carolyn. I'm tired of being a symbol." Carolyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So don't go." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I gave my word. And because—" Aretha trailed off. "Because what?" "Because Martin asked me to do something 3 weeks before he died, and I didn't do it. And I've been carrying that for 4 years. This was the secret Aretha hadn't told anyone. Not her sisters. Not her manager. Not even Ruth Bowen, her closest friend. 3 weeks before Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, he'd called Aretha from Atlanta. He'd asked her to come sing at a rally in Birmingham. A dangerous rally. A rally where the police were expected to turn violent. And Aretha had said no. She'd said no because she had a recording session she couldn't miss, because her label was pressuring her, because she was exhausted. And then he was dead. And Aretha had spent 4 years wondering if things would have been different if she'd been there, if her presence would have changed something, if her voice would have protected him somehow, the way music had always protected her. It was irrational. She knew it was irrational. But grief doesn't follow logic. So when Coretta called and asked her to honor Martin's legacy, Aretha heard it as a second chance. A chance to say yes when she'd said no before, even if it cost her everything she'd promised herself, even if it broke her. December 15th, 1972, Madison Square Garden, 6:12 p.m. Aretha arrived at the venue 4 hours before showtime. She always arrived early. It was the only way she could prepare herself, mentally and spiritually, for what a performance required, especially a performance like this. The garden was already buzzing with activity. Stage crew adjusting lights, sound engineers running checks, other performers arriving, their faces a mix of excitement and nervous energy. This wasn't just any benefit concert. This was a public declaration that the movement was still alive. Aretha's manager, Ruth Bowen, met her at the artist entrance. "Everything's set," Ruth said. "You're closing the first half, 45-minute set. Then intermission. Who else is performing?" "Roberta Flack, the Staple Singers. Harry Belafonte speaking. Jesse Jackson's introducing you." Aretha nodded. These were people she respected, people who'd been in the trenches. But she also felt the weight of it pressing down, because this wasn't going to be a celebration. This was going to be a resurrection, and resurrections required blood. She went to her dressing room and sat quietly for an hour, not listening to music, not warming up her voice, just sitting, breathing, trying to find the center of herself that she would need to get through this. At 7:30 p.m., there was a knock on the door. "Miss Franklin, Coretta King would like to see you." Aretha's heart jumped. She stood, smoothed her dress, and opened the door. Coretta stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 security guards. She was wearing a simple black dress and pearl earrings. Her face was composed, but Aretha could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying an entire movement on your shoulders. "Aretha," Coretta stepped forward and embraced her. "Thank you for being here." "Of course." They sat in the dressing room, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Coretta said, "I'm not staying for the concert." Aretha blinked. "What? I can't. Coretta's voice wavered slightly. "I can't sit in that arena and listen to people sing about Martin's dream without breaking down. And I can't afford to break down in public. Not now. Not when everyone's watching to see if I'm strong enough to carry this forward." Aretha reached out and took Coretta's hand. "You don't have to be strong every second." "Yes, I do." Coretta's voice was firm. "Because if I'm not, they'll say the movement died with Martin. They'll say we can't continue without him, and I won't let them say that." Aretha understood. She understood the performance of strength, the mask you had to wear when the world was watching, the way you had to sacrifice your private grief for the public good. "Where will you go?" Aretha asked. "Home. I'll watch from home." They talked for another 10 minutes. Coretta told her about her children, about the foundation she was building, about the struggle to keep Martin's legacy alive while also trying to figure out who she was beyond being his widow. And then Coretta stood to leave. "Aretha," she said at the door, "when you sing tonight, sing for yourself, not for Martin, not for me, not for the movement. Sing for yourself, because that's the only way this is sustainable. Do you understand?" Aretha nodded, even though she wasn't sure she did. Coretta left, and Aretha sat alone in her dressing room, trying to figure out how you sing for yourself when 15,000 people are expecting you to sing for history. If you're moved by this kind of story, subscribe for new stories about the moments that changed music forever. 9:45 p.m. Backstage. Aretha stood in the wings, listening to Roberta Flack finish Killing Me Softly. The crowd was electric. You could feel the energy in the building, a mix of hope and mourning and determination. This was what the movement felt like when it gathered in one place. This was what it sounded like. Jesse Jackson walked past her, heading towards the stage to introduce her set. "You ready?" he asked. "I'm ready." He paused, studying her face. "You sure? Because you look like you're about to walk into a war." "Maybe I am." Jesse nodded slowly. "Well, if it's a war, we're glad you're on our side." He stepped out onto the stage, and the crowd erupted. Aretha could hear his voice booming through the speakers, talking about Dr. King's legacy, talking about the long road ahead, talking about the power of music to heal and inspire and mobilize. And then he said her name. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin." The roar that followed was deafening. Aretha walked onto the stage, the lights hitting her like a physical force. She moved to the piano. She always felt safer at the piano, her hands on the keys, her voice grounded in the instrument her father had taught her to play when she was 6 years old. The crowd was on their feet. Signs bobbed in the air. "We shall overcome. Keep the dream alive. Soul power." Aretha sat at the piano and adjusted the microphone. "Good evening," she said, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "It's an honor to be here tonight, to sing for a cause that meant everything to Dr. King, and to stand with all of you who are committed to continuing his work." Another roar of approval. "I'm going to sing some songs tonight that I hope will move you, that will remind you why we're here. And I want to start with a song that Dr. King loved, a song about respect, about dignity, about demanding what you deserve." She didn't need to say the title. The crowd already knew. Her hands came down on the keys, and the opening chords of Respect filled Madison Square Garden. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People danced in the aisles. They sang along, every word, their voices joining hers in a collective declaration. This was what music could do. This was the power of it. Aretha moved through the set. Think, rock steady, daydreaming, each song building on the last, the energy in the room climbing higher and higher. And then, 32 minutes into her set, during Natural Woman, something happened. Aretha saw movement at the back entrance, security guards stepping aside, a figure in black moving through the shadows. She kept singing, but her eyes tracked the figure. It was Coretta King. Coretta was walking down the side aisle, slowly, her face unreadable. She was supposed to be at home. She'd said she couldn't stay, but here she was, moving toward the stage with the inevitability of a tide. Aretha's voice caught, just for a half second, but it was enough. Kenneth Williams glanced back at her, concerned. The horn section held their notes a beat longer, compensating. Aretha pushed through the next verse, but her mind was racing. Why was Coretta here? What had changed? And what did it mean that she was walking toward the stage right now, in the middle of this song, in front of 15,000 people? Coretta reached the front row and stopped. She stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes locked on Aretha's. And in that moment, Aretha understood. Coretta hadn't come back because she wanted to hear the music. She'd come back because she needed to see if Aretha was singing for herself or singing for the ghosts. This was a test, not a cruel test, a necessary one. Aretha finished the verse and let the song fade. The crowd applauded, confused about why she'd stopped early but trusting that she had a reason. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aretha said, her voice steady even though her heart was hammering, "we have someone very special here tonight." A spotlight swung toward Coretta, illuminating her in the aisle. The crowd erupted. People stood. People cried out her name. The applause was thunderous. Coretta raised one hand in acknowledgement, but she didn't smile. She just kept her eyes on Aretha. "Mrs. Coretta Scott King," Aretha said, "the woman who has carried this movement forward with grace and strength that the rest of us can barely imagine. Mrs. King, would you join me on stage?" The crowd roared its approval, but Coretta shook her head, a small, definite shake. She wasn't here to be honored. She was here to witness. Aretha understood. She turned back to the microphone. "Mrs. King has asked me to continue, so I will." But here was the problem. The problem that had been building for 4 years. The problem that had kept Aretha awake on 1,000 nights. The problem that had made her promise herself she would never do this again. She didn't know how to sing for the movement without drowning in it. Didn't know how to honor Dr. King's memory without carrying the weight of his death. Didn't know how to be Aretha Franklin the artist and Aretha Franklin the symbol at the same time. And now, with Coretta standing 15 feet away, watching her, waiting for her to figure it out, Aretha had to make a choice. She could sing another movement anthem, another song about struggle and hope and overcoming, another song that would make the crowd cheer and cry and feel like they were part of something bigger than on themselves, or she could sing the truth, her truth, the truth about what it cost to be the voice of a movement, the truth about the nights she cried alone in hotel rooms, the truth about the times she wanted to quit, to run, to disappear into a life where nobody expected her to be a symbol. Aretha's hands hovered over the piano keys. The arena was silent now, waiting, and then Aretha Franklin did something she'd never done in her entire career. She started to talk. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I haven't said before. Something I'm not sure I should say now. But I think Mrs. King came back tonight because she knew I needed to say it." Coretta's face remained still, but something in her eyes softened. "4 years ago," Aretha continued, "Dr. King called me and asked me to come sing at a rally in Birmingham, and I said no. I said no because I was tired, because I had work to do, because I'd already given so much, and I didn't think I had anything left." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not what they'd expected, and 3 weeks later, he was dead, and I've been carrying that no ever since. Carrying it like a weight I can't put down, wondering if things would have been different if I'd said yes, wondering if my voice could have protected him somehow. Aretha's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. "And tonight, when I walked out on this stage, I thought I was here to make up for that, to finally say yes, to prove that I'm committed to the movement, that I honor Dr. King's legacy, that I'm willing to sacrifice whatever it takes." She paused, took a breath. "But Mrs. King told me something earlier. She told me to sing for myself, and I didn't understand what she meant, until just now." Aretha looked directly at Coretta. "Because the truth is, I can't carry Dr. King's dream for him. I can't be the voice of the movement if it means I lose my own voice, and I can't honor his memory by destroying myself." The arena was utterly silent now. Dr. King didn't die so that we could martyr ourselves. He died so that we could be free, and that includes free to be human, free to be tired, free to say no when we need to say no. Aretha's hands came down on the piano keys, but this time she didn't play an anthem. She played something quieter, something more personal. She sang "Ain't No Way," a song about needing love and support, a song about vulnerability, a song about the impossible things people ask of you and the loneliness of not being able to deliver. And as she sang, something shifted in the arena. People weren't cheering. They were listening, really listening, because this wasn't a performance anymore. This was a confession. This was Aretha Franklin admitting that she was human, that she had limits, that she had broken under the weight of expectations, and was only now learning how to put herself back together. And the most extraordinary thing happened. Coretta Scott King began to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears running down her face, her hands still clasped in front of her, her body utterly still except for those tears, because she understood. She understood exactly what Aretha was saying. She'd been carrying the same weight, the same impossible expectations, the same pressure to be strong every second, to never show weakness, to sacrifice her private grief for the public good. And Aretha had just given her permission to be human, too. When the song ended, there was a beat of silence, and then the arena exploded. Not with the kind of applause you give to an entertainer, with the kind of applause you give to someone who's just told you a truth you desperately needed to hear. People were crying, people were embracing each other, people were nodding, recognizing themselves in Aretha's confession. Coretta walked toward the stage, slowly, deliberately. She climbed the stairs, something she hadn't planned to do, something her security team was visibly uncomfortable with, and walked across the stage to where Aretha sat at the piano. Aretha stood, the two women embraced, and the arena lost its mind. This was the moment that redefined everything, because this wasn't about the movement needing Aretha Franklin. This was about the movement learning to make space for humanity, for vulnerability, for the truth that you can't build a sustainable revolution on the backs of people who are martyring themselves. When they finally pulled apart, Coretta took the microphone. "Aretha just did something very brave," Coretta said, her voice thick with emotion. "She told the truth, and I want to say something too. Something I haven't said in 4 years." The crowd waited. "I'm exhausted," Coretta said simply. "I'm heartbroken, and I'm not sure I can carry this weight much longer. But tonight, Aretha reminded me that I don't have to carry it alone, that all of us, everyone in this arena, everyone working for justice, we carry it together, and we carry it sustainably, with love for ourselves as well as love for the cause." The applause that followed was different, quieter, more reverent. This wasn't a concert anymore. This was a church service. Before we go further, subscribe for new stories about the nights that changed everything. The rest of the concert was a blur. Aretha sang 3 more songs, but it was clear that the emotional climax had already passed. The performance continued, but the real work had been done in that moment of confession and embrace. Backstage, after the show, Aretha sat in her dressing room with her sisters and her manager and her band. Everyone was quiet, processing what had just happened. Kenneth Williams finally spoke. "I've played with you for 6 years. I've never never seen anything like that. I've never done anything like that, Aretha said. Are you okay? Carolyn asked. Aretha thought about it. I'm tired. I'm emotionally wrecked. But yeah, I'm okay. I think I'm more okay than I've been in 4 years. There was a knock on the door, one of Coretta's assistants. Mrs. King would like to see you. In private. When you're ready. Aretha stood. I'm ready now. She followed the assistant to a small office behind the main stage area. Coretta was there, alone, sitting in a folding chair with her hands in her lap. Close the door, Coretta said. Aretha did. I need to thank you, Coretta said. Not for the performance, for the truth. I wasn't sure I should say all that. You had to, because I needed to hear it, and I think everyone in that arena needed to hear it. Coretta stood. Aretha, I came back tonight because I was afraid. Afraid that you were going to give one of those performances that destroys you, that leaves you hollow, and I couldn't let that happen. Not because of me, not because of a promise I asked you to make. I would have done it, I know, and that's what scared me. Coretta walked to the window, looking out at the New York skyline. Martin used to talk about you. Did you know that? He did. He said you had a gift, not just your voice. The gift of making people feel seen, making them feel their humanity. And he said the movement needed that more than anything. Needed people who could remind us we're human, not just soldiers. Aretha felt tears prick her eyes. And tonight, Coretta continued, you did exactly that. You reminded all of us that we're allowed to be tired, allowed to need rest, allowed to say no, even to you, especially to me. Coretta turned back, because if the movement survives on the backs of people who are martyring themselves, then we've already lost. We've become the thing we're fighting against. We've sacrificed humanity for the cause, and that's not what Martin died for. They sat together for another 20 minutes, talking about grief and pressure and the impossible weight of being symbols instead of people. And when Aretha finally left, she felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years. Peace. Not the peace of having done enough, the peace of knowing that being human was enough. The next morning, the newspapers ran the story. Aretha Franklin and Coretta Scott King share emotional moment at benefit concert. But the articles didn't quite capture what had happened. They talked about the embrace. They talked about the tears. They talked about the unity of the movement. But they didn't talk about the permission that had been granted that night. The permission to be human. The permission to have limits. The permission to honor the cause without destroying yourself. Over the next several months, Aretha received hundreds of letters from people who'd been at the concert, and the overwhelming theme was the same. Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for showing us we're allowed to be tired. One letter from a young activist in Mississippi said, I was about to quit. I thought if I couldn't give everything, it meant I didn't care enough. But after hearing you that night, I realized that caring for myself is part of caring for the movement, that I'm more useful if I pace myself, if I say no sometimes, if I remember I'm human. Aretha kept that letter in her dressing room for the next 20 years, because that night at Madison Square Garden, she'd learned something crucial, something that changed how she approached her career and her relationship with activism for the rest of her life. You can't give what you don't have. You can't pour from an empty cup. And honoring someone's legacy doesn't mean destroying yourself. It means living in a way that makes their sacrifice meaningful. Dr. King didn't die so that Aretha Franklin could martyr herself. He died so that she and everyone else could be free. Free to be human. Free to have limits. Free to sing for herself. In the years that followed, Aretha continued to support the civil rights movement. She sang at fundraisers. She donated money. She used her platform to speak about justice and equality. But she also said no sometimes. She took breaks. She prioritized her health, her family, her own creative needs. And the movement didn't collapse because of it. In fact, it grew stronger because other people saw Aretha's example and learned that sustainability was part of the work, that you had to take care of yourself in order to take care of the cause. Coretta Scott King continued her work, building the King Center in Atlanta and fighting to establish Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a national holiday. She carried the torch for decades, but she also learned to share the burden, to let other people step up, to ask for help when she needed it, and she stayed in touch with Aretha. Not constantly. They weren't best friends, but there was a bond between them, forged that night at Madison Square Garden when they'd both admitted they were human. Every January, on Dr. King's birthday, Coretta would send Aretha a card, and every card said the same thing. Thank you for that night. Thank you for the truth. Thank you for reminding me I'm allowed to be tired. And Aretha would send one back. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for giving me permission. December 2017, Aretha Franklin's final interview. Less than a year before her death, Aretha sat down for an interview with a Detroit journalist. They talked about her career, her hits, her legacy, and then the journalist asked about the Madison Square Garden concert in 1972. That was the night everything changed for me, Aretha said, her voice still strong despite her declining health. That was the night I learned that honoring someone's memory doesn't mean destroying yourself. What do you think Dr. Dr. King would have thought about that night?" the journalist asked. Aretha smiled. "I think he would have been proud, not because of the performance, because of the truth, because I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach all of us, that the movement is about liberation, and that includes liberating ourselves from the expectation that we have to be superhuman. Do you have any regrets about that night?" "Not one." Aretha's voice was firm. "That was the night I became free. Free to be myself. Free to love the movement without being consumed by it. Free to honor Dr. King by living well, not by dying slowly." She paused, looking out the window at Detroit, the city that had shaped her. "And I think that's what Mrs. King wanted me to learn, that the truest way to honor someone is to live. Really live, not just survive." When Aretha Franklin died on August 16, 2018, one of the people who spoke at her funeral was Coretta Scott King's daughter, Bernice. "Aretha Franklin changed my mother's life," Bernice said. "Not with her music, though her music was extraordinary. She changed my mother's life with her honesty, with her humanity, with her willingness to stand on a stage in front of 15,000 people and admit she was tired." Bernice described the night at Madison Square Garden, described the embrace, described what her mother had told her about it years later. "My mother said that Aretha Franklin taught her something my father never could. She taught her that being strong doesn't mean never breaking. It means being honest when you're about to break. It means asking for help. It means sharing the weight instead of carrying it alone." And then Bernice said something that brought the entire funeral service to tears. "On the night my mother died, in 2006, one of the last things she said was, 'Tell Aretha thank you. Tell her she was right. Tell her we're allowed to be tired.' If these stories move you the way they move me, subscribe for new stories about the moments when truth changed everything." Today, that concert at Madison Square Garden is remembered in civil rights museums and music history archives. But it's not remembered for the songs Aretha sang. It's remembered for the truth she told. The truth that you can't build a movement on the backs of people who are destroying themselves. The truth that honoring someone's legacy means living well, not dying slowly. The truth that being human is not a weakness. It's the whole point. And the truth that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is admit you're tired and ask for help. There's a photograph from that night that hangs in the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. It shows Aretha and Coretta embracing on stage, both of them with tears on their faces, 15,000 people standing and applauding behind them. The caption beneath the photograph reads, "December 15th, 1972. The night soul music learned to breathe." Because that's what happened that night. Aretha Franklin and Coretta Scott King gave each other and everyone watching permission to breathe, permission to be human, permission to honor the cause without sacrificing their humanity. And in doing so, they didn't weaken the movement. They saved it, because a movement built on martyrdom dies with its martyrs. But a movement built on sustainable love, on honest humanity, on people who care for themselves as much as they care for the cause, that movement can last forever. That night, Aretha Franklin stopped her concert when Martin Luther King's widow arrived. And what happened next didn't just leave 15,000 people in tears. It taught an entire generation that the truest way to honor a legacy is to live, really live, not just survive. And that lesson, that revolutionary, life-saving lesson, is still echoing today in every activist who takes a rest day, in every organizer who asks for help, in every person who chooses to care for themselves as part of caring for the world. Aretha Franklin didn't just sing that night. She set people free, including herself. Subscribe for new stories that reveal the moments when one decision changed everything. And let me know in the comments, which moment in Aretha Franklin's life moves you the most?